Ladies and gentlemen, Binnall of America!
And now, ladies and gentlemen, your host, Tim Binnall.
No commercials, no subscriptions, no network, no rules, and at the end of the day, my friends, no comparison. Welcome back to another edition of Binnall of America. I'm going to break sort of chronology here a little bit because we have a Christmas show coming next week, which is completely not Christmas at all. It was intended to be Christmas related, but it fell apart like in the middle of the Christmas discussion, which is why we're very lucky tonight to be doing this episode, because this is the Christmas show in a sense. We're going to really dig into the holiday season, Christmas time, with a pair of very special guests. I had the great pleasure of meeting them about a month ago at the Strange Realities Conference in Nashville. We had a lot of fun down there. That was the first time I had the chance to meet Tobias and Emily Wayland. They are prolific participants, you could say, in the paranormal world. A lot of folks, I'm sure, have heard of them before. First time we've gotten them on Binnall of America, hopefully not the last. And they are behind a new book that has just come out a few weeks ago and perfectly timed for the holiday season. I'm going to hold it up even though we're going to be on audio here. It's Yuletide. There's this little part at the top I can't read. The Singular Fortean Society's Yuletide Guide to High Strangeness. And Tobias wrote the book, and Emily did the drawings for the book, some fantastic drawings in the book. So I wanted to get them both on the show, talk about the new book, and just talk in general, have some fun, have a chat with them after getting the chance to meet them down in Nashville last month. So welcome to the show, Tobias and Emily. It's great to have you on Binnall of America.
Well, thanks so much for having us. It's great to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to this.
Well, we'll start out as we do with every show when we have some new guests. So give us the bio, the background. I guess we'll start with you, Tobias. Who is Tobias Wayland? How'd you get mixed up in the world of the paranormal? And how'd you decide to – there's so many people who are aficionados of this stuff, but then they just stay aficionados, and that's awesome. They're the people who are listening to the show right now, right? But then there are a lot of people who then become, as I said earlier, participants in this, content creators, podcasters, authors. You guys do all that stuff. So,
Right.
Tell us a little bit of your bio, your background, how you got involved in the paranormal, what lit that spark, and then what made you decide to be a part of the community, if you will.
Sure. So, obviously my name is Tobias Wayland, and I am the I always repeat my name, just in case. And Anyway, and I am the editor-in-chief and lead investigator for the Singular Fortean Society. And that is a journalistic and investigatory organization that Emily and I founded back in 2016. If you can't tell by the name, we take a Fortean approach. And if you're not familiar with that word, and I don't know how many people are, then I can give you a quick explanation. The word Fortean comes from Charles Fort, who was an early 20th century collector of weird news stories. So Charles Fort would collect all of these weird news stories from all over the world. He would compile them in these sizable volumes, and he would speculate, often quite tongue-in-cheek, about various connections and commonalities and what might be behind it all. And so one of Fort's most famous quotes is, "One measures a circle beginning anywhere." And I've always taken that to mean that by investigating any aspect of the paranormal, be it UFOs, ghosts, cryptids, parapsychology, whatever, you can understand something about all of it because these subjects seem to have so much in common. And so that's why we landed on that word Fortean. And of course, the other word that trips people up sometimes is singular. I understand that we're not the only Fortean society in the world. Singular doesn't have to mean one. It can also mean unique or remarkable. And so something that that we believe very strongly
I never even given it any thought. But go ahead, sorry.
Right? I tried to make it so catchy that people wouldn't even think about it. They'd be like, "Oh, that's snappy," and then like that would just be the end of it.
That's kind of where I landed on it. Yeah, I never give it. I'm like, okay. When you said that, I'm like, hey, wait a minute, he's right. What is this singular stuff? No, go ahead.
Perfect. Working exactly as intended then. It can also mean unique or remarkable. And so we think that everybody's perspective is important in this field, right? Like, because so much of this is experiential, so much of the evidence we have is anecdotal. It seems sometimes as though the human mind is the only tool capable of detecting or recording the paranormal with any sort of reliability. And because of that, individual perspectives become very important. And so what we're looking for then is not a singular Fortean society, but rather a society of singular Forteans. People who are open-minded with that sort of holistic viewpoint on these phenomena, who have unique or remarkable perspectives to bring to bear to hopefully help us bring the study of these phenomena into the 21st century. Now, in terms of myself and why I got into this, I like to think if I wouldn't have had the experiences that I have had in my life, I probably would have been a pretty normal, if a bit nerdy guy, I probably wouldn't give a shit about any of this. I'd probably think a lot of it was pretty silly, frankly. And that's not to deride any experiencers. I'm an experiencer myself. That's why I'm here. It's really simply to say that it's because of the experiences that I've had from a very young age that I participate in this field. Ever since I was old enough to remember, strange things have happened to me. Some of my earliest memories are just fragments of memories, really, from 2, 3, 4 years old, of being terrified to go to bed, knowing that when I would do so, that something was coming for me. And so I would remember waking up to the feeling of being seemingly lifted out of bed, or hands digging painfully into my ribs, or hiding under my covers, like that tried and true but woefully ineffective method of warding off monsters that all children try, right? And seeing what looked like hands pressing in from the outside of that blanket. And that phenomena progressed throughout my life, continued, and so when I was old enough to read and eventually ride a bike and get down to the library, in the late 80s, early 90s, I would find books by people like John Keel or Brad Steiger, Lauren Coleman, Rosemary Ellen Guiley, all of these pillars of the paranormal community, at least at that time, of course. And it helped. It helped a lot. I would read about people whose experiences mirrored my own. And if nothing else, if it couldn't provide closure, it at least provided some catharsis. And so sometime in my late 20s, I had I decided that I wanted to try to contribute in some way. And so I began volunteering as a field investigator with the Mutual UFO Network. And so I did that with MUFON for a few years. And I had gone back to school, and I was getting a degree in English. And so I knew that I wanted to write. And, I thought long and hard about how I might be able to actually contribute. And it sort of occurred to me at a certain point that perhaps the best way that I could contribute, maybe the best way I could help people in the way that I had been helped, would be to do the thing that helped me the most. And that was, helping people tell their stories and getting these experiences out there for other experiencers, to make them feel less alone. And so that's when I met Emily, and we got together. And we sort of had a matching skill set to produce the things that we want to do. And so we decided that creating the Singular Fortean Society, and then me writing news articles and eventually books that, of course, Emily has designed and now illustrated, would be a way to sort of give back in the same way that had helped me when I was so young.
All right. That was a very good answer. that was deep. All right. Well, how about you, Emily? So did you have any interest in this stuff growing up, or is this kind of like something you got into by way of Tobias?
Well, I always had a curiosity growing up.
Yeah, give us the bio, the background. You gotta play the game. So,
Sure.
Who is Emily Wayland, and how'd you get mixed up in all this?
So, I mean, when going back to when I was a kid, like, it's hard to say like why you like the things you do, but like I remember like my school library had a couple there were children's books because they're in an elementary school library, but there was a book on UFOs, there was a book on Nessie, and I thought it was fascinating. And I always thought it was interesting, but I think just coupled with like I grew up in a very like scientific household. I was kind of more or less, it's no, not to discredit my family by any means, but I was conditioned to be more skeptical, but at the same time, I was like, well, this stuff would be cool. I think it's possible.
Right.
So like I had my first experience in my mid-20s, and in short, it was a shadow figure of my grandfather. And I had,
oh wow,
when I had, and he had just passed away like the spring before, and I kind of came out of sleep to see it, and then just was comforted by it and fell back asleep. But for years, I still I dismissed that as a dream. It's just kind of what it was my instinct at that point.
Yeah.
Well, fast forward to when I met Tobias on our first date. I forgot what we were talking about, but it led me to bring up the Paulding Light in the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, and that's kind of where we hit it off. Like he right off the bat was just like, basically, hey, I'm into this weird stuff. I'm going to get it out of the way, and I'm like, but hey, I know about this weird thing. And after sharing my experience with him,
yeah,
right. After sharing my experience, and he had experience investigating these things, he's just like, well, I don't think you should dismiss it as a dream.
Right.
So it's, over time, just the casual interest and curiosity coupled with wanting to learn more in our complementary skill sets, it kind of just all fell into place where, he could do the writing, I can do the photography. My degree is in photography and design. And then eventually here we are with this book. So yeah, it's been quite a ride.
Yeah, it's cool. It's really cool. You don't see too many couples in the world of the paranormal. And I should put you over too. You've done all the covers for the Feminine Macabre series, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So as well as all the illustrations here and a lot of artwork, you've done quite a bit, with that people have seen in the paranormal, I'm sure.
Yes. Like I've done a lot of like, one of the things that I think that we are able to do is if a witness describes something, I can do my best to illustrate that or render it to see it from their perspective.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like a sketch artist almost.
Yeah. Usually
quite literally a sketch artist. Yeah.
Yeah. Usually it's like a photo collage because we can usually like either go on Google Earth and find the location or find something similar and then render like a dark figure or whatever they were looking at, and then you can kind of get a good idea what it looked like through their eyes.
Right. Well, because so often witness descriptions of various entities are not extremely detailed. And so so little to work on, it's helpful to have someone like Emily who can convey so much with using so little, frankly, and I do think it helps give the readers really a perspective on the witnesses' overall experience.
And I think a lot of the times the witnesses almost witnesses do try to draw things, but I'm sure it's a struggle for them. So whether or not they've provided sketches or not, we are able to kind of, they can look at it and be like, it was like that, or,
Right.
I just
Or
think
no,
it's a good visual aid.
it should be this way or whatever. Yeah. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the new book. I need glasses, so I keep getting tripped up on the the Singular Fortean Society's Yuletide Guide to High Strangeness. What it seems kind of obvious. Like, obviously, in a way, it's like a Christmas book. That's but what gave you the idea to do a Christmas book in the first place?
Sure. So, first and foremost, Christmas has always been my favorite holiday. Most people guess Halloween, and I suppose on the surface that would be the obvious answer. But no, it's really always been Christmas for me, and there's always been this sense of magic and wonder, tied to this time of year for me, even before I knew anything weird about the actual holiday. And so when I started seeing a resurgence in traditional belief systems attached to, Yule and Yuletide and the Christmas time season, I would see people, mostly regurgitating various bits of folklore, which is great. That certainly has its place. So you would see a lot of stuff about like Krampus, right? Like Krampus,
right. Krampus
so
is huge
hot right now. Yeah. And you would see the same couple of facts, basically, for lack of a better word, sort of reprinted over and over again about Krampus. And I was like, well, that's cool, but we can go deeper, right? Like there might be something more to this. And the more I looked into it, the more interesting Christmas became. A lot of people have this tendency to conflate all pre-Christian belief systems, right? So they'll just assume that, I guess I shouldn't say assume, but what they'll do is they combine, really specifically in like the modern neo-pagan movement, right? They will combine the Celtic with the Germanic constantly, and it drives me nuts. Like, just drives me absolutely nuts, because they're not the same thing. And so you need to really separate, like, Samhain, the Celtic harvest festival upon which, of course, Halloween is based, from Yule, which is a completely different Germanic holiday. And these peoples were not celebrating the same holidays. And I don't know why people thought they were. And so really, in a lot of ways, Yule is sort of a Germanic Halloween, honestly, because it's always been a time of year where amongst the Germanic peoples. And so, when I use that word, a lot of people get confused and they think I mean specifically Germany. That's not what Germanic means, at least in this context. What I'm referring to is the Indo-European language grouping from which we get, the Scandinavian languages, of course, the German languages, and even English. English is a Germanic language.
Would it be fair to call that like the Western world, to simplify it almost?
Well, not
that probably
really.
has its own definition, I'm sure, but
because
in my mind,
the
like,
Western,
you mean kind of the European area, essentially.
Kind of, because the Western, the Western world or just Europe is still too broad, because that's going to include the Celts along with these Germanic tribes.
We don't want that, because you don't like you want to keep, as the song says, keep them separated.
Right. Well, just to be intellectually honest, we just have to, and so Yeah. So I mean, Yule is kind of the Germanic Samhain in a lot of ways. In that during that time of year, these Germanic peoples thought that the spirits would be much more active. So spirits, fairies, gods, all of this stuff would come out of the darkness this time of year, of course, the darkest time of year. And it was sort of a spooky, dangerous time. And they would tell all of these stories, these stories that have given us figures like Krampus or Frau Perkta or Grula or, Lucy or the Yule Cat or any of these other now famous holiday figures. They all sort of arose out of this tradition of storytelling during the darkest time of year. And so this has always been a scary, dark time. That's not something new. And it's always been something that has not existed in the same tradition as something like Halloween until very, very recently. Again, like it's only within the past 100 years or so that neo-pagans would have included both holidays within the same belief system. And don't get me started on neo-pagans because I don't want to upset a lot of people. But there tends to be a lot of conflation of separate traditional belief systems in the neo-pagan movement without a lot of consideration for things like scholarship and accuracy. And so that was something that I wanted to bring to this book as well, because I think that's important. I think a proper understanding or at least as good of an understanding as we can really get, because a lot of this stuff is difficult to track down due to a lack of written records, frankly, is important. We should know where our culture comes from. We should know the origins of our stories as close as we can get. But then, of course, more than that, I had to ask myself, where do these stories really originate? Is there some external source that has inspired these stories? And so in digging into that, I landed on a firm maybe.
All right. Well, let's keep it in a sense simple in a way. Let's go. I'm going to give you a really simple question, but it's actually quite complex. But it's the kind of thing that I think, in a way, kind of what you're talking about, which is like everybody seems to have their half-assed version of like how Christmas came about, where they're like, well, it comes from the Romans or some shit. And it's like, well, it's actually a big kind of, so I guess untangle this part where, the 25th, the solstice, Saturnalia, Yuletide, it's all like all these different like things, and people get them all mixed up all the time. So, I mean, and that's kind of where you kick off the book in the first place. So I think that would be sort of a good learning experience in a way for the listeners. Because as I said, I'm like one of those people that's like, I don't know, it comes from some holiday from back ago, and they switched it and said it was Jesus's birthday, and now it's about Santa. So that's my version of Christmas. So, elucidate the subject here for folks. As I said, untangle it, if you will.
Sure. So, I mean, you're mostly right, at least as far as my understanding. The reason that Christmas is celebrated when it is because during the 4th century, as Rome became increasingly Christian, they wanted to convert their pagan holidays and traditions into something Christian. And so they already had this festival that was for Saturnalia. And, it involved a lot of feasting and gift giving and general merriment. It was a harvest festival. And, harvests obviously are part of the natural cycle. And so the harvest is sort of the earth sharing, it's fecundity, it's life giving, and so I don't think it's too much of a stretch then to try to maneuver that narrative into the birth of a messianic figure, right? I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And so that's why we celebrate Christmas when we do. But that's not the whole story. Like there, for instance,
Exactly.
In modern paganism, you see Yule celebrated around that same time, but that traditionally wasn't the case as far as we know. And again, there aren't a lot of written records. So a lot of this has been pieced together, through Roman historians and Christian monks and other less than reliable narrators, right? But as far as we know, traditionally Germanic tribes would have celebrated Yule sometime in January-ish. But it was much later, post-conversion, that a specific king, this was, I hope I pronounce this right, King Hakon I of Norway. So he was a converted king. He was a Christian king, but he had a bunch of pagan subjects. And so one of his edicts was, okay, we can still do Yule, but we're going to move it. It's got to be, all of the celebrating has to be when Christians are celebrating Christmas. And that was sort of the opening attempt to further Christianization, right? And it's obviously largely worked because most of these nations, or at least until recently, have been majority Christian. But that's why Yule was moved, and that's why so many of these traditions have been folded into Christmas. So it began with Saturnalia, which was Christianized to instead be a celebration of the birth of Christ. And then we brought in all of these other stories in a further attempt to Christianize the population by moving a traditional festival season to this Christian holiday. And so it really is basically what you said. It's just it just took a while. There were multiple steps.
Right. Well, that's what's interesting, too, when you think about it, because it's like, I imagine being there at the time, and the king's just like, no, from now on, we're moving. It's not going to be this generational event, whether it's Yule, whether it's Saturnalia, both cases, where they're like, no, now it's going to be on this day or this time. We're moving it completely to a different fucking time. And now it's all about Jesus being born. It's just really crazy to imagine, if you're just there that year that it happens. You're like, wait a minute, what? And then it sticks, which is kind of really wild. But I wonder, in a way, if that's, I'm sure that's probably a super simplification of it, but it's like, I wonder if sort of the gift-giving part of it's like how it manages to stick in a way, too, where it's like, it's a time of bountiness and sort of giving, and that's why they're just like, hey, whatever the fuck you want to call it, whatever you want to call it, just as long as we don't have to work that day and we can have the big meal or exchange toys or whatever. We'll do whatever you call it. We don't care. I wonder if that was just kind of the response. But it's interesting that they make such a big cultural change and then it's stuck for so long. And yeah, like I said, it would be interesting to be in that perspective at that time when that went down.
Sure. Well, I think that this is something that doesn't happen overnight, right? I think this is something that there probably was some resistance to, and only over the course of generations has it become something that we would recognize as in embedded tradition.
Right.
So, there were if you look at history and specifically the history of conversion to Christianity, it was a pretty bloody affair, frankly. There was resistance. Not everybody just necessarily wanted to become Christian overnight. And so, yeah, there's a lot more to it, but I think you make a really good point, because I do think that there's a reason that so many of these holidays from separate cultures are held around the winter solstice and the darkest time of the year in the northern hemisphere, right? And that's because it fucking sucks. It's a shitty time of year, and nobody likes it. And especially before electricity, it was dark and terrifying, and
Super
the
cold.
weather could kill you.
Yeah,
and
exactly,
so
yeah.
everything about it seemed just supernaturally terrifying. And so it makes a lot of sense that I think people, especially in northern climates, would develop these stories, these, scary stories, but also develop, feasting days surrounding this, lighting huge bonfires in celebration to push back this darkness, of holding feasts and drinking mead and just trying to have a party at what must feel like the end of the world every year,
Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And so I think you're right.
Yeah.
As long as you keep that part of it, people are going to be into it.
Right. And I'm no expert on a lot of things, on most things. But so I could be very wrong about this, but we use this Gregorian calendar that was also imposed on us. And it makes you wonder if maybe the solstice, maybe that was fucking New Year's Day to these people long ago, before, even in the ancient times. They were like, well, this is the mark of the end of the year, because now the days are going to get longer again. So it may be just it may be so super ingrained into us as a species almost, that it's like, but it's interesting because, we don't really go crazy for the solstice now, but it's been supplanted. But this whole month is full of festiveness now, it seems. So anyway, I'm going to tag Emily in now so you can take a breather, Tobias. And I feel bad because this is kind of like a softball question in a way. It's a setup to start the conversation a little bit. So do you have a favorite illustration? Because the book is replete with fantastic illustrations from Emily. Do you have a particular favorite of yours, that you did for the book?
It's honestly tied between two of them.
Okay,
And that
I want to
would
know
be-
what they are, because I have favorites too, so I want to know. Let's see
It would
if I got it right.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear what yours are, but Odin and the Wild Hunt and the Yule Cat.
Oh, wow. Okay. Let me find the name of it here. Let me see. I know exactly. Where is he? This one here. Herdaskiller, which is the door slammer. It's on page 59 in the book. He's just this is
One
a
of the
naughty
Yule
little
lads.
pose. Yes, one of the
Yeah.
Yule lads. The way he just looks so mischievous there. There's a lot of there's a lot of detail to that one. And also the elf picture is one of my favorites. And he also looks kind of mischievous, but in sort of an Alfred E. Newman way. He reminded me of Alfred E. Newman. So yeah, I love him. He's cool. And the Santa's fantastic. The Santa's that's a top-notch Santa. So
Well, thank you.
well done on the Santa. Yeah, I was like, shit. That's Santa. That's a bona fide. That's a fantastic Santa. Believe me, if you handed me a pen and were like, draw Santa right now, it would be horrifying. It'd be nowhere near that. So now, how did you? So how did the process go down? Was Tobias handing you chapters like in Misery, and you were at the desk having to churn out the drawings? He's like, here are the pages. I've got the pages. I'm just teasing.
Well, I think, we started this almost 2 years ago, and we it evolved over that time with what it was going to be to what it is now. And I think I did Krampus right away. I did the Yule Cat right away. I knew those were going in there. So I did a lot of the ones that I knew were going in there. But, I had a general list, but as the book evolved and changed, and we added all these paranormal accounts, I added those. And like, while I was going through the book, laying it out, I noticed a couple things that I was like, we need an illustration for that. We need an illustration for that. So I would add those.
Right.
So it was kind of all over the place. I would say the hardest part for me was drawing these Christmas creatures and people and entities outside of season. It's very hard to get in the mindset in July.
Right.
But, having kind of thought of this book at first coming out of the holiday season and then leading into it in the fall again, organically, I think it all just kind of came together. And like the Mariluid in the back, I just drew that. That wasn't actually initially put in the book, and then we decided to add it as an appendix.
Yeah. Gotcha. Well, I really was, as I said, I'm no artist. I was really impressed with the eyes. You did a really good job on the eyes. There's a sort of like
Thank
a lot
you.
of the little beings, or the beings, it's like the people, humanoids or whatever you want to call them. Were very. I was
Funny
like,
you
wow,
mentioned
those
that
are really
too, because
good eyes.
when I'm just doodling, I'm usually just drawing eyeballs. Like, I don't know why, I just do.
Well, they're good. They remind me of like there's a whole documentary about the guy that made like the pictures of the kids that had the eyes. Like these were in a sense similar to that. I was like, they really catch your attention. So, well, let me see.
I'm
where
glad
we
they
go
have that
here.
effect.
The Yule. Yeah. Well, let me jump to. I want to talk about the sheep squatch actually, because that was sort of that was one of my favorite beings in the book. It's what's remarkable about the sheep squatch is that it's like kind of a fairly contemporary thing. It's not obviously there. You mentioned that it comes from the goat man sort of traditions, but then there are these people who are seeing sheep squatch apparently. And I mean, I've heard of the case. So, but it's very interesting. That's not something you see every day. Sheep squatch. So, Tobias, what do you make of that as someone who's looked into these Mothman stories, who's, you guys do these on the ground investigations and stuff. It's one of those things that's kind of hard to fathom because it's not like something it's just like a one time, not necessarily one time, but it's like a isolated thing in one place where it's like, okay, maybe this is like some kind of really fucked up bear or something. You know what I mean? I always try to go to like the first explanation that isn't, a sheep Sasquatch hybrid. So, but to talk a little bit about the sheep squatch case, and if you prefer, you tie it in with how it connects here. It's in the book, obviously, because it connects to these ancient characters. One being a goated man, if you will, or a goat.
Sure,
Yule goat. There you go.
Yes.
Yeah, honestly, that's surprising because usually sheep squatch is my go-to explanation for everything. But that's fine. We can just agree to disagree on that. But no, yeah. So I wanted to include it because of Grula and Krampus specifically, but also you're right. The Yule goat and Goatman, of course, bear a striking similarity to the sheep squatch as well. And so what's interesting about these sheep squatch sightings is they're I guess how do I well, there's just no nice way to say it. So what's interesting about these sheep squatch sightings is sort of their lack of overall credibility. They aren't sourced super well, right? There aren't very many sightings to begin with. And so many of them that do exist, and I'm not saying that necessarily like they're hoaxes or made up or anything like that. What I am saying is their provenance is unknown. It's in question.
Yeah.
And so you have to then wonder about the sightings' actual credibility, and so that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, that makes perfect
people
sense.
People
Absolutely.
hear stuff like that. Yeah, they get big mad about it, and they think I'm trying to be a debunker or something, and I'm not. I'm just trying not to be stupid, right?
Right. No. You have to be like
struggling.
realistic. That's kind of, that's sort of my take on a lot of this stuff too. You have to be realistic about it, where it's like, okay, this may not be the fantastic thing that, we're talking about, that it might, that it could be, but it also very well could not be. So there's nothing wrong with saying that.
Yeah, totally. And so there are some very compelling stories out there, but again, it's difficult to track down actual firsthand eyewitnesses, and some of the eyewitnesses that do exist are not. I wouldn't even necessarily categorize their sightings as sheep squatch. They almost just sound more like regular old Bigfoot kind of stuff. But you see that on TV, I think, more often than not. You might have a show.
So where the hell did this sheep squatch come from then? Did this just kind of like pop up out of nowhere? Where like someone noticed that there were a bunch of these and it became a sheep squatch?
Right. Well, the earliest known sighting that I could track down was back in 1994. Right. And it was reportedly involving a group of women who were driving near West Virginia's TNT area, which I'm sure is probably familiar to many listeners of the show here. And so they were driving on an icy road rather. Boy, I can talk. Near the TNT area, and they said that they were surprised by this large creature lumbering out of the forest, and so they were moving pretty slowly, given how icy the road was. And they said that they got a good look at the thing, and they described it as being between 7 and 8 feet tall, covered with long, shaggy white hair, and a head with a pointed snout and ram-like horns. And according to their story, the quote-unquote sheep squatch froze momentarily in their headlights before fleeing into the darkness. Now, this was a story that I've seen plenty of times, and I've seen it in plenty of places, and I don't know who these women are. I don't know if they exist. If they do exist, I hope they're listening, and I hope that they will reach out to me, because this is fascinating.
Weird. It's very apocryphal almost, where it's like, we don't really even know, anything about, very weird, the whole thing in a sense, if you think about it.
Right. And that's most of these stories. They have just sort of appeared seemingly out of the ether. You see that a lot with Goatman stories too. And Goatman really sort of belongs in the category of urban legend more than legitimate cryptid or paranormal phenomenon, at least in my humble opinion. But yeah, that's sort of sheep squatch for you. People, by people, I mean internet stories will talk about seeing this weird, large, white horned creature, and it usually just kind of comes out of nowhere and scares people, and then numbers off to go do sheep watch things.
Yeah, it's an interesting. It's kind of like a one-off. It's like a one-hit wonder. It's like the Van Meter mystery, but less. Maybe less. I mean, they're both pretty well documented, I suppose, but just I guess they kind of maybe less situated in one spot per se, because the Van Meter mystery, it's a creature that's Van Meter, that. Well, sheep squatch, he's just kind of wandering around sort of a various, area sort of in the middle of the country, I suppose, right?
Sure.
I think, is that where they are? I mean, I'd have to look at all the sightings to see, but I always kind of imagine it's sort of like in the southern and also West Virginia type of areas.
It's definitely more like the Appalachia region. But I think probably the big difference to me, if you want to compare sheep squatch to something like the Van Meter visitor, would be sort of the difference between how stories are told and shared and grow in the internet age versus how stories did that in the 19th century age of like yellow journalism, for instance.
Yeah.
And that, again, like, boy, I hope there aren't a lot of true believers listening right now. I swear to God, weird shit has happened to me, and I don't think it's all fake, and I don't think people are stupid. But Tim just happened to pick like a specific subject in the book that isn't the most credible. So I have to be real about it, you know?
No, I just thought it was a weird thing. It's like, you know, we've never talked about the sheep squatch on the show before. So it was like, oh, wait a minute now. I do feel like we deviated a little bit from the Christmassy-ness of it all, but I was kind of intrigued by that. What's that?
That'll happen
Emily, what's
sometimes. This stuff gets weird.
Exactly. Now, let's jump to, well, I don't want you to get too deeply into the Yule lads. Part of me was like, I kept waiting for you to somehow connect them to the Seven Dwarfs. I'm like, is this somehow connected to the Seven Dwarfs? I feel like this is of the same family somehow. Is there any connection, do you think, or am I just crazy? Well, Emily, what do you think? Let's start with you. I guess.
Okay.
Slow down, Tobias. Go ahead, Emily. Yeah, we'll give Emily a shot on this one. What do you think?
For me personally, I think it's more coincidental. I think that small men, whether they're gnomes, Nizartonta, dwarves, Yule lads, are kind of all across Europe. There are 13 Yule lads instead of 7. And it is it's a specifically Icelandic story, as their mother is that witch Grula. Now, it would be interesting to perhaps compare like the evil queen in her hag form to like the dwarves, but we know those two aren't related. So for me, I just think it's more it's coincidental because those stories exist all across.
Yeah. It's interesting, the emergence of these of a band of little people. That's kind of like a recurring thing. That's what I find interesting about the book. You kind of point out these things. There's an interesting kind. We talked about the Sheep Squatch, how it feels connected to the Krampus and I cannot get that lady's name, so we'll just leak Gruella or whatever.
It's a weird Icelandic name that I am sure I'm mispronouncing every time I say it, but I picked one pronunciation, and that's what I'm going with. And people can just make fun of me behind my back about it. Like, what it's Icelandic is difficult to speak.
I forgot I even said it.
I'm just going to go with Gruella. So we'll all do our own thing. Where was I going with all this? Where did I start on that?
We're still talking about Sheep Squatch and its relation.
I like the driving force of the book in a way is sort of like these things from the past, like the Yule cat, which is this mystical enormous cat, which I found very like cruel in a way. I guess it's because like the people didn't work hard enough to get clothes, but it's like the cat kills the people who didn't get clothes for Christmas. It's like your Christmas already sucks, and now you're falling victim to the Yule cat, which is crazy. And how there are these weird big cat sightings nowadays, these mysterious ethereal cats. And you sort of ask the question throughout the book where it's like, are these merely stories and traditions, or are they sort of this overarching, are these archetypes or something? Is this some kind of ancient thing that keeps manifesting, and maybe what we're seeing is the manifestation of it in modern times, if you will? I like that. That's sort of the driving force behind the book. I guess you want to extrapolate on that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can use Sheep Squatch since we've been talking about it already, and I mean, Sheep Squatch should be our go-to. But I think that what's interesting to me is basically exactly what you said, and using Sheep Squatch as an example, if there are examples in this particular lore of people who have had authentic experiences seeing this thing. And I think there is some evidence to believe that there could be, I don't know, especially in the handful of sheep squatch sightings where you've got people going on the record, giving their name and everything. Those have a certain credibility to me, and so I think that looking at those specifically, we have to entertain the idea that people are seeing something, they are encountering something, experiencing something at least that is outside of their understanding. And that could be where the stories of sheep squatch began. And, maybe some people picked up on that and, how the internet is, started sort of running with it on their own. But there's still this core of actual human experience that represents the actual heart of this mystery. And, so I have to wonder if some of these Christmas legends didn't arise out of the same phenomenon. You take Gurla, for instance, right? So she's a lot older than Christmas, as far as we know. Like, she first appeared in the Prose Edda, which I believe was written in the 12th or 13th century in Iceland, but she wasn't associated with Christmas at all at that time. She was literally listed amongst like this list of giantesses, right? And that was it. And so like that's her first appearance in the Prose Edda. All we know about her is she's a giant or something. And from there she gets folded into this Christmas tradition. And so in looking at stuff like that, it's interesting to me to imagine what could have led to that, right? So like she was obviously a popular figure. And so you can sort of see after that, there were stories told about her. She appears at various points in language. Like people use her name to mean different things, to represent different things. And so, eventually her popularity leads to her being told in these stories, probably during Yule, I would imagine, that are then later folded into the Christmas holiday. And again, what's interesting to me about that is, where do these stories come from? Could there be an external source? So could there be, say, in the case similar to the case of the sheep squatch, could there be a core truth? Could there be some human experience that led to Grula or Krampus? If people are talking about hirsute horned entities today, and claiming to have real encounters with them, claiming to have actual experience with these entities, could we then assume at least the possibility that the stories told of these other figures, at least originally, before they became holiday legends, also came from a place of people claiming to have real experiences with them?
Right. Well, as you were talking about Grula and her evolution in a way, it led me to sort of think, in a sense, it's kind of like, I can't think of a particularly iconic sort of Christmas special. Maybe like the Star Wars Christmas special. I don't know. But it's like, it sounds like she's like a figure from then contemporaneous pop culture who gets folded into, like, has her own, like at some point in the distant past, had her own proverbial Christmas special where she was like mixed in to the Christmas stuff of the time. It's like, oh, now, it's we got a special Christmas story for you today, and we got Gruella in it. And everyone's like, oh, wow, Gruella, I like this. And then it got more popular over time, and then she just kind of got, and she became a part of the Christmas season as time went on, and people kind of just forgot where she even came from in a way. You know, it's an interesting phenomenon, if you will.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, that brings us to sort of the main character of this contemporary Christmas season, which is Santa Claus. We'll talk a lot about Santa tonight. Talk about the evolution of Santa Claus. This is another one of those things where, and I'm sure when you do these interviews for the book, you probably have to do this question all the time, so I apologize. But by now you should probably have a rote answer to the question. But talk about the evolution of Santa Claus, much like the whole Christmas thing. It's a lot like kind of what I said earlier was like, they took a Roman holiday and moved it. It's like, they just took him off a Coke can, and that's how they got him. Like, you know, you always got someone who that's their whole origin of Santa. And it's like, I think it might be a little more complex than that, Uncle Randy. So tell us, you know, the evolution of Santa, to bring us through the evolution of Santa. And while you do that, I'm going to get some eggnog.
Sure. Yes. So despite whatever Uncle Randy, after his sixth beer on Christmas, thinks, Santa Claus didn't arise out of some marketing campaign. It's really just our modern depiction of him that did. You know, we actually got the name Santa Claus literally from the Dutch for Saint Nicholas, and so like that's pretty easily traceable back to that particular Greek saint, right? And actually, that leads me to one of my personal favorite illustrations that Emily did for this book. Is the Saint Nicholas one, because he just looks fucking haunted, right? Like he has this look in his eye.
I'm glad you said that, because yeah. If you had said he was like adorable, I'd been like, oh no, I think he's very kind of menacing. He's a bit menacing.
Yeah, he looks like he's seen some shit, and he'll tell you about it. You know,
bags under his eyes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but you know, most people are probably familiar with the story of Saint Nicholas and you know how he basically delivered gold to this family to prevent the father from having to like sell his daughters into prostitution, which is a whole, I mean, honestly, that could just be an episode on its own, because seriously, to unpack that fucking story and all of its like societal and frankly problematic elements would take forever. But what's important?
Yeah, that's definitely one you read kind of askance, where you're like, what? Wait a minute.
Right.
I don't like where this is going.
But what's important for our purposes is that there was this 4th century, I think it was a bishop, a bishop who, through popularity, you know, was elevated to sainthood, and he had these stories told about him, and the most popular one, of course, being that he saved this family from poverty by delivering them wealth that because he inherited wealth, I think, from his parents. And so, you know, he gave it to poor people. And in this particular story, he saved them from poverty. And of course, he didn't want any credit for it. And so that seemed, you know, very generous, of course. Mm-hmm. And so this has been a popular story for centuries, mm-hmm. right? But it's not the whole story, right? So like, yes, Santa Claus absolutely takes his name from St. Nicholas. Like that is indisputable. But going back to what we were talking about before, when all of these other traditions were folded into this Christian holiday, that's when we began to see the beginning of the Santa Claus we know today, right? So there are many elements to the modern Santa Claus that don't exist in the stories of St. Nicholas, right? Like, for instance, traveling the entire world, in a sleigh pulled by reindeer, So, yeah, it seems a little silly, but you can unpack that a little bit and see the similarities that it has with, say, the Wild Hunt, right? And so the Wild Hunt, there are quite a few different variations on what the Wild Hunt is. One of the most popular versions is that during Yule, Odin will lead this spectral hunting party. And they're not the kind of thing that you necessarily want to run into, because Odin is capricious at the best of times. And so, sure, if he likes you, like he might deal out weal, and if he doesn't, he will deal out woe. And you definitely don't want to be on the receiving end of any woe, right? And and so this was something that, of course, was very popularly told during Yule, and people talk about, well, like if you hear the wind howling, like, sure, it might just be the wind, but maybe it's the Wild Hunt. You never know.
Yeah.
And so this is something that we see reflected in the modern Santa Claus, right? Like, so you've got these eight reindeer, for instance. Well, Odin rode a horse, Sleipnir, with 8 legs. And you've got Santa Claus traveling all the hell over the place, and sometimes he gives out gifts, but sometimes he gives out coal. Like if you suck, you're not going to get a present. You're going to get coal because you suck.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, he's a little more judgmental than Saint Nick, frankly. And
that's
I think
true.
I think that's some more inspiration that may have come from a pre-Christian figure like Odin and his Wild Hunt. But so you see the influence that these cultures have all had in eventually creating this final figure. And again, Santa Claus was not super popular until relatively recently. When it comes to a lot of the Christmas traditions, like Santa Claus or Santa's elves, stuff like that, it really didn't seem to catch on until the 19th century and into the early part of the 20th century. And so you see that in the poem, The Night Before Christmas, for instance. That's actually one of the earliest, if not the earliest, depiction we have of Santa Claus as this, overweight, jolly, rosy-cheeked fellow, prior to that being based on figures like Odin, Father Christmas, and St. Nicholas. Santa Claus was usually depicted as pretty gaunt, frankly, because none of those, like, they weren't fat guys, they were never traditionally depicted as big dudes or anything. So it really was that poem that sort of began that. But really, of course, what did it was the Coca-Cola marketing campaign.
Right.
That really was inspired by the poem The Night Before Christmas. And that really is what gave us the modern depiction, of like Emily Drew in the book. Of course, that was based on the Coca-Cola marketing campaign. And so, yeah, you've got the large, belly full of jelly or whatever, rosy cheeked,
full of jelly.
Yeah, the hat and all that. Now, let me ask you, who is this? I should have looked this up. I just kind of dismissed it. I guess I've always dismissed it. Who is this Father Christmas character? Who is this guy? I thought he's not just England's. I guess he is England's Santa, but he's different from our Santa.
Yeah. So Father Christmas, like I said, much like Odin, has influenced the overall picture we have of Santa, and trying to remember what the exact difference is. But if I remember it all correctly, it more or less comes down to being another figure that sort of arose out of these earlier pagan traditions and is thus related to the same stories and traditions that would have given us things like the Wild Hunt. I think it's just another sort of iteration of those kinds of figures and characters. Because what's interesting is when you look at folklore and using the Wild Hunt as an example, there are so many different figures throughout history and in folklore that have led versions of this, and so you see it all the time. And then, when it comes specifically to Father Christmas, I think
you mentioned in the book that like maybe he has like some elaborate robes and shit, and that kind of that turns into the suit in a way when it all kinds of melts together.
Right. And so that's basically what I was getting at is, he sort of arises out of that same tradition. And, it just is another iteration of that type of character.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to blow your mind now because I'm going to give you a hot take because you said earlier, Santa in his final form. I don't think we've seen Santa in his final form. We're just living in this version of Santa. He's going to keep changing. He's like a game of telephone. He just keeps picking up little weird cultural shit from the time. And so, I bet you, if we're still around in 100 years, we may not even recognize Santa. It might be a completely, or it might have some completely be like, when the fuck did Santa get wings? Santa has wings now? This is insane. And it's like, well, that, maybe with technology somehow they'll have to explain it that way or who knows. But I think Santa will keep changing, but it's going to be like a slow process, kind of like how Gruella just morphed into Christmas time, just barreled her way into the holiday season. I think this will, over time, I think we'll see some changes to Santa. Maybe small, maybe big, but we probably won't even see them. They're incremental. It'll be something that's like in another generation.
I mean, that's how these things work, right? You already see that in the multiculturalism that is currently being applied to Santa Claus. Like Santa Claus doesn't have to just be a white guy anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so as we get more and more depictions that are representative of different ethnicities and such, then that's in evolution of Santa Claus, right? And I mean, if people if there's $1 billion corporation that wants to start showing Santa Claus as like a 3-headed purple alien, and they put enough money into it, in a couple of 100 years, Santa Claus is going to be a 3-headed purple alien. It just is what it is. That's the nature of these things. And what's interesting to me specifically is when you look at the experiences of people who claim to encounter in real life these holiday figures, specifically somebody like Santa Claus, is they never talk about the gaunt, haunted St. Nicholas, right? It's always the fat, cheerful Coca-Cola Santa Claus that has no place in history, is not representative of any historical anything, but literally was just made up by a soda company. Right. And that's fascinating to me.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see. You're absolutely right. Yeah, Santa is becoming more diverse, and so eventually maybe that'll settle into something where Santa's like just completely different over time. Who knows? He's a magical elf. That's part of it too. So I don't know. I hear different things about Santa Claus, kids, if you're listening. It's like, is Santa an elf? Is he a person? You see these shows now. I'm like an old man. You see these shows now with now Santa's a guy who's been cursed. Is it some kind of curse that's fallen up? The Santa Claus. So it happens a lot in movies. You're stuck. Now you have to be Santa. It's like, oh shit. All right. So it's interesting. What I find fascinating in a lot of ways, too, is if you think about it, again, like in 100 years, people will be looking at our stories and sort of some of this stuff will stick in over time as it goes on and become part of sort of the global Christmas tradition. You know what I mean? But I mean, like in 100 years from now, not everything's going to last, even though people might think that's the case. Certain things just stand. It's only, so only a few things really rise to the top and make it last 200-300 years. William Shakespeare. People still talk about him. They don't really talk about like the fucking 35 other people that wrote plays at the time. So that things will evolve that way. Now, I'm going to throw to Emily on this question. It's elaborate. I feel like she can chime in because I think we can all have an opinion on this one. It's not sort of fact-based that we rely on Tobias for here in the conversation. We've had to have Tobias explain all this shit to us over the course of the show because he wrote the book. So, but one of the interesting questions that comes up, you guys talk a lot about the Santa sightings, and it raises the question of like, what is happening here? And obviously you can think about your answer to this, Tobias. We'll jump to you in a minute, but sort of you guys lay out, or Tobias lays out the different various theories. Like, is this a manifestation? Is it like a egregore? I prefer the term tulpa, but I think they're pretty much the same thing because it's easier for me to say. But yeah, egregore. Yeah, I consider them interchangeable. Tobias is shaking his head here now because I'm sure there's some very, very finite sort of thing. But just a general manifestation.
I think you're real pedantic about it.
That's what I mean. Yeah, no. We play fast and loose here on the show. Just relax, buddy. But is it a ghost? Is it like something that's made up or whatever? So, I mean, what do you think of these tales of people who see Santa Claus? Because some of them are really compelling in the book. Some of them are really, we're talking like multi-witness cases, a couple of, at least one or two, at least one multi-witness case. I know a girl who said her father worked for the FAA. And it was like, well, I mean, that's pretty wild. And other sort of instances like that. I think there's a couple. So I guess, what do you think is behind these incidents?
Well, I think they're seeing something. I think the egregore is an interesting idea, but something I've noticed just across all of the cases we've investigated is that when witnesses see something, they look for things from that's familiar to them from their world to help describe it. So if they see this thing that's unknown and it's as iconic as, the old man in the red with the white beard, or the sleigh flying, or the reindeer, like they go to their head when they're trying to make sense of something that they can't describe. I think it's only natural for them to, find these things. So like, naturally we've all had, I can only speak for myself, but I feel like most children growing up these days, like we had to sit down with our parents and have the conversation about how Santa isn't real. Well, he's definitely not real in the sense.
Great. Okay. I was going to mention that. That's how you found out. That's one of my favorite questions when we do around the Christmas time shows. So all right. Wow. Okay.
I think actually this is a little tangent, but I believe I was like in fourth grade, I think. And that's when other classmates were starting to say like, Emily, he's not real. And I was like, I'm going to film it. I'm going to prove it to you that he is. And then I think my parents were like, Emily, we got to talk about this. But like, obviously he's not real in the sense of the stories. We don't have anything coming down the chimney, but who's to say that he's not real? There's so much weird stuff out there that like, I know what he isn't. But like, I think it's entirely possible for there to be like, I don't know, fairy-like entities of some nature.
Right.
He could be
and some
real.
kind of, he could be some very prominent person in the ethereal realm that's like, he's fucking Santa Claus. So it's like, yeah, man, I'm Santa Claus. I don't fly around and do all that shit, but they think I do, or they say I do, so that's cool. And maybe he can pop in and out and just kind of, on a very limited basis, like you guys point out in the book. It's like, well, we don't have like a shitload of, like, certainly not as many like as Bigfoot sightings or UFO sightings or ghost encounters, but part of me wonders if it's just like there's some kind of like, I don't want to say regulation, but there's like rules or something where it's like, look, I can only pop in like so many times, or else people are going to freak out and shit. So I have a certain quota of appearances I can make each year. Like we're talking fucking 2 each. So
which is interesting. Which is interesting you mentioned that, because there's a lot of different Christmas movies where there's some kind of like magical curse or trip back in time, or like, gosh, there's this really terrible Christmas movie called The Spirit of Christmas.
Really awesome Christmas movie.
I mean, it is.
One of those Hallmark movies.
It's not Hallmark, but it's along that same like vein.
It's like
but basically, this ghost can only come back for this time around Christmas. I feel like that's not the. I mean, that's the first one that came to my mind. But like, there's so many stories about curses and this limited time of year that when you bring that up, it's interesting to think about.
Yeah. Well, part of me was like, okay, you did a good job kind of convincing me otherwise, because going into it, I'm like, okay, these are, as I said, I just use the term tulpa interchangeably with egregore, but for the sake of not driving you insane, Tobias, we'll just go with egregore. So I just kind of figured egregore, these children are manifesting Santa, but you make a good point in the book where it's like, okay, well, there's like millions of children who believe in Santa, so they should be manifesting them way more often, manifesting Santa way more often. So it does raise an interesting question where it's like, okay, well, maybe that isn't the case. But I find with the paranormal in a lot of ways, and this strangeness of it all, it's like some kind of recipe that we don't know, that we haven't quite figured it out. And that's the whole point of all this, I guess, in a sense. But it's like certain conditions have to apply that maybe even some that we don't even know. So it's like, so when somebody sees a UFO, it has to be this time, and this thing has to happen, and maybe they have to be going through something too, and maybe also the moon has to be. It's like all, it's just, and then that's how it happens. So I wonder if it could also be in that sense. That might be that might be my explanation for how these things happen. But where the Santa comes from, I have no idea. But I guess what's your take on, these sightings and sort of what might be behind them? If they are, if we're taking them at face value.
Right. Yeah. I mean, of course, the majority of Santa Claus sightings are unsourced, although I have at least one person that I have spoken with directly who has had what she would consider like an actual Santa Claus sighting. And she is a serious person that I find credible. And so I have to take her experience seriously. Yeah. That being said, when it comes to the sightings themselves and what they might represent, I think in a paranormal sense, yes, you have something like in egregore, which of course is a living thought form generated by the belief of a population. Now, boy, egregores, like it's just, they're so fucking popular. And I feel like it's the kind of explanation people use when they don't have a real explanation. Right. And so they're just like, oh no.
Interdimensional. It's interdimensional. Yeah. It's like, well, what does that even mean? Fucking,
right. Yeah.
It comes to,
so I mean, so like I have some issues with egregores, of course, with Santa Claus specifically, first and foremost, most of the sightings that we had collected, when people report seeing Santa Claus, he's not usually doing very Santa Claus-y things, right? Unless like I missed a bunch of stories of Santa Claus where he just kind of lurks around people's houses being creepy.
Yeah.
And very few people report anything like him bringing gifts or consuming milk and cookies or anything like that, right? So like there's very little physical evidence to support the idea of a Santa Claus who believes he's really Santa Claus, because like in egregore would know, or according to it would be that thing, right? Like it would be like, no, I am Santa Claus, and so it should behave like Santa Claus. But you don't see.
I see.
You don't. Yeah, you don't see mysterious presents. Like you never hear parents talk about presents mysteriously showing up under their tree that they didn't buy, right? Yeah. Like I have one story of that, and it's not super Santa Claus related because the figure involved really, well, honestly looked more like maybe Saint Nick than like actual Saint Nicholas than Coca-Cola Santa Claus. But yeah, so you don't see the kinds of behaviors that I would expect, if this entity really believed it was Santa Claus according to what Santa Claus is supposed to be. So if it is in egregore, based out, off of our beliefs, built of the dreams of children, then why isn't it acting like fucking Santa Claus? Like that part doesn't make any sense to me. Beyond that, there are billions of children in the world, quite a few of which believe in Santa Claus or are aware of Santa Claus, and so I would expect to see maybe more sightings. I would expect to see sightings across,
if they were conjuring it with their minds. You're saying?
Yes, if it was in egregore, and I would expect to see it across different populations. And honestly, the idea of egregores to me too is anything that is sort of belief based, like in anything, any philosophy or idea that espouses the possibility of using nothing more than belief to affect reality is a little too close to prosperity gospel to me, for me to not see some kind of problematic element too, like anything that's just like, oh, you wanted Santa Claus to visit, you should have believed harder. You wanted present for Christmas, why didn't you believe harder? It's like, oh shit, my fault for being born poor, I guess.
Well, Christmas is tough. That's it's tough for. Yeah, a lot of people do without these days. It's sad.
Sure. And so I don't know that we should encourage that kind of thing without, actual strong evidence to support it. Again, I can't rule it out. And I do find the idea of entities formed out of belief to be fascinating because, quite frankly, belief plays a huge role in humanity. It's a big part of being a human. We like to think that we're all these rational creatures, but really so much of what informs every decision we make in every day is based on a series of beliefs that we may or may not have, real good rational evidence for. And so that is fascinating to me. And the idea that belief shapes our reality, even if it doesn't do so in a magical way, it certainly does in a psychological way, so there is some sort of effect no matter what you believe. But I just don't think there's enough there for me to confidently say that, these Santa Claus sightings are representative of an egregore. I mean, billions of children probably believe in Spider-Man, nobody's out there seeing fucking Spider-Man.
That's true. That's exactly right. Yeah. I'm going to give you, I'm not giving this to you, actually. I'm going to hold on to this, but I'm going to share with you $1 million idea that I just thought of when we were talking.
Okay. Full partners.
Pitch. All right. Well, I don't know about All right. Emily, listen now. You're a movie fan, so I want your opinion on this. Group of paranormalists, they get together around the holidays. They're like, we'll conjure Santa. Tulpification. We're going to get together around a table. We're going to use our minds, beliefs. We'll bring Santa to life. They do. But as Tobias was saying, he thinks he's Santa, and he tries to do all the Santa shit. And it's like, no, dude, you can't. And they have to, like, chase him down and stop him, and it turns into, like, a wacky comedy where it's like this. It's kind of like Elf in a way, but it's like he thinks he's Santa. He is Santa. In his mind, he is Santa. He's Santa. So it's like, shit. We just created Santa, like, what the, he's like, I got to get to the North Pole, and he's fucking around with reindeer, and he insults a little person. This could be like an Elf sequel here almost. So,
I love it.
I don't know.
Love everything about it.
I had to get that on the record. I wanted that on the record.
You heard it here first. There is one other possibility. I mean, I'm sure there are a myriad of possibilities, but there's one other one that I'd like to address, and that's the idea that what people think they're seeing isn't really what they are seeing.
Right?
I think that anybody who has been following or studying, researching, interested in any way the paranormal throughout their lives probably recognizes that many entities seem to interact on a parapsychological level, right? Like seemingly on the level of human consciousness in a lot of ways. And that sort of crosses every paranormal discipline. You hear about entities being able to take on various forms and everything from, ghosts and hauntings to saucer occupants, right? And using telepathy and things like that. That even expands into the realm of cryptids, and so it's very much this invasive theme, that runs throughout every aspect of the paranormal. And so when you see this thing that is apparently taking its image from the popular zeitgeist in terms of what Santa Claus is supposed to look like, according to the Coca-Cola company and now everybody. And appearing as that, but not really doing Santa Claus things and sort of lurking around people's houses, that's some murky business, right? And so what makes more sense to me, if we want to go down this sort of paranormal path for an explanation, would be something that is manipulating people into thinking what they're seeing is Santa for whatever reason, whatever its motivation might be.
Because it's Christmas time. It just came up with whatever, it probably I think that really might be, you know what I'm saying? It's like, look, I can't fucking appear as Santa like in May, and that'll really freak them out. Like, I need to just because it's always like a fleeting glimpse. So it's like, just appear as Santa and take off. It's fine. They won't, that'll be a funny one when I tell the other part of the ether when I get back, or whatever the thing is. Yeah.
Right.
It's
like, just wait till I get back and tell Zipzor about this in our flying saucer. He's going to think it's hilarious.
It's like I was down there and this kid saw me and I'm like, fucking Santa. I turned into Santa. It was awesome. So, I can totally see that.
Right. Well, because it's not just Santa either. I have these three Easter Bunny sightings that I had to include because I don't know what the hell else I'm going to do with them. But it seemed apropos, considering what I was talking about at that point in the book. And they're very similar to the Santa Claus sightings in that people are seeing this impossible thing, this life-size Easter Bunny, complete with vest in I think at least 2, if not all 3 sightings.
Yeah.
And he's not really doing Easter Bunny things. He's not dropping off Easter baskets, giving kids candy or hiding eggs or anything. He's just kind of hopping around a yard, and then quickly disappearing. And so it's very, very similar, in that respect. It's almost as though, again, like something, well, like you mentioned, during certain times of year, it is convenient for certain entities to appear as these popular figures. Like the Easter Bunny isn't even a figure that has the kind of cultural connection that like a Santa Claus does. Like the Easter Bunny doesn't really arise out of centuries old traditions involving like actual historical figures or like religious figures or deities or anything. It's just this fun story that we fucking made up. I mean, like it seems weird. Again, you could make the argument like, oh, it's an egregore or something, but a lot of that to me is just explaining one mystery with another, because what the fuck's an egregore? How do we know they exist?
Well, like you said too, it's people believe in a lot of crazy like children believe in a lot of like characters and stuff. You don't see a lot of character sightings in a way, so it does make it interesting and perplexing. Now, I was going to mention this when I was sent you the link, because I was like, oh, I'm going to catch him by surprise with this, but I'm like, maybe not. So I was wondering, as I'm reading the book, the Grinch. Does the Grinch have any sort of connection to all this? Because the Grinch has now become, like, I noticed it a lot this year. The Grinch, like, you know how Krampus is really hot now? Grinch is, like, fucking in, like, Flynn. Like, Grinch is going to last for a long time. He's like the Christmas character alongside Santa. Like I was saying, like in 2 or 3 generations, it might be like Christmas time is populated by like 3 or 4 big figures. You got your Santa, you got your Krampus, you got your Grinch, you got some other, you got Bunny the Elf. Who knows? That's kind of how it works. Like these things just keep perpetuating and growing. So, but is there any sort of callback? Do you see any connection in a way? Maybe even just in spirit between the Grinch and these classic folkloric tales that sort of inform the Christmas tradition.
Yeah, definitely. If you look at, say, Grula as an example, like she shows up around Christmas time because she's kind of grumpy and she wants to like eat children, And so having traditional characters whose entire personalities have become centered around, being shitty during Christmas is not new. This is a centuries old tradition of I think the new thing that Dr. Seuss brought in creating that character was a redemption arc. That's something that we haven't seen. That's not traditional at all. But it wouldn't be a very good story if he still sucked at the end of it.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah. You got to make.
But I think it's part of a long tradition of evil Christmas characters.
Yeah, Christmas spoil sports. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So it's funny how like these sort of general themes just keep recurring, but under different guises. Again, that's kind of like the thrust of the book in a way. It's that these different archetypes or whatever keep perpetuating. And again, I guess you kind of can see it in the Grinch as the spoil sport in a way. And it's like once they kind of nailed that character, it's like the Santa Claus on the Coca-Cola can. It's like once you saw that, it's just the perfect sort of character. You're like, all right, that's indelible. This green fucking thing. But that end, what do you make of this Krampus revival, which is kind of interesting? It's very much a product of our times, I feel like. People really are into dark horror stuff, so it's like, it makes perfect sense that this Krampus character would really become a part of the holiday zeitgeist in this day and age.
Sure. I mean, I love the revival of these classic characters. I love that people have a new appreciation for their contribution to the holiday. Frankly, I think it becomes a much richer experience to include all of this history, and Krampus specifically is such a fun, interesting character, like as sort of the antithesis of Saint Nicholas, because of course, if you're looking at specifically like the stories of Saint Nicholas, like he mostly he brought gifts and stuff, and so you would need a sort of opposite to that. And although Krampus probably predates Christianity, although his origins are pretty murky, he became that antithesis to Saint Nicholas, that opposite, that person who was willing to do harm to bad people, whereas Saint Nicholas is just giving presents and thanks. Because Krampus, again, is one of those characters who doesn't punish people indiscriminately. Like, you have to be ill-behaved for him to show up and like whip you with birch sticks and then throw you in his basket and take you to hell. Like you usually have it coming.
Right.
And so that's always interesting to me. And then just from like a sort of cultural level, looking at the ways he's been used, like the postcards, like there are these vintage postcards that you can get from Germany that go back quite some time.
Yeah.
And they have all of these fun images of Krampus. Or our friend Amanda Woomer was sharing. There have been female depictions of Krampus where she'll be like chasing a guy up the stairs, whipping him for doing whatever shitty thing he did, And so I think Krampus brings a sort of dark levity to Christmas time. A more sort of adult theme, if you will, than a lot of people have traditionally associated with this time of year. And I think that's why it resonates so much with so many people, because Christmas definitely didn't start off as like kiddie bullshit, but it's kind of gone that way. Right. And so,
absolutely. Yeah.
Like finally we're getting a lot more Christmas horror movies. Like there have always been some, like I grew up watching Silent Night, Deadly Night and all that stuff. And those are great. Like they're classics. But nowadays, instead of like having to, fervently rent that movie and then go watch it in your parents' basement, without them knowing, that it's just out in the open now. People openly appreciate horror themes during Christmas time.
Yeah.
And sure. I think that there's a huge market for it because, people love Christmas, but we're also grown-ups. And so we want adult Christmas, and adult Christmas can be dark, but it can also be funny in like a grown-up way. Mm-hmm. And I think Krampus, good Lord. I think Krampus really contributes to that.
Right. Well, it's interesting, the whole thing. It feels like Christmas has changed. Maybe it's just because I'm older, or maybe it is changed. I think it has changed because there's always the whole like ridiculous thing, like, the war on Christmas and everything. It's like, I feel like Christmas is, obviously Christmas Day is the culmination. And of course it has the celebration of the birth of Jesus and all that, praise be to he. But now it's like Christmas is, whether it's because of the commercialism, whether it's the appropriate multiculturalism, whether it's sort of bringing in these old traditions, it just feels like Christmas the Christmas season has become this sort of melting pot of all kinds of just holiday stuff, if you will. I can't quite put a pin in that, but you know what I'm saying. It's almost more like the Yule season, if you will. It's more of a season of all this different shit that culminates with Christmas. Very far from sort of the idea of what it had been when it was imposed upon people way back in the day.
Oh, sure. I mean, well, from relatively early on, there's been sort of a Christmas season, and there are a variety of celebrations, really specifically between Christmas through like New Year's. I mean, you were like, I say you. I'm looking at Emily when I say that. Like, you were raised Catholic, so like you're probably aware of all of the various like other celebrations that take place around that time.
And Christmas didn't really officially end until like after Epiphany.
Right. See, that's what I'm saying. Epiphany.
Yeah, exactly.
What the fuck? I was raised Methodist. I don't even know what that is, but it's part of this long standing tradition of the Christmas season, but it keeps expanding, which I think is largely due to commercialism.
Yeah. That's what I'm that's what I was trying to kind of say.
I think like
it's become less.
Sucks.
Yeah, well, the commercialism sucks, but it has become less like about the day and more just like about this fucking time of year and all the shit that comes with it in a way. Like how I busted out the eggnog just now. How it's like all this different stuff. I mean, I'm sure it was always that way, but now it seems even more diverse in a way, which I think is good because it's all kinds of stuff that encompasses Christmas that isn't just the big day, or if you will. And I feel bad. We talked about it's like people go without around Christmas time. It's tough. Yeah. Tough time of year. So
it definitely can be. That's something that I think it's important to remind ourselves of. I mean, every single year, this is life. This is how it goes, right? There are going to be people going without. There are always going to be people for whom this is their first Christmas without a loved one, and so I think just going out of our way to express kindness, to offer other people grace, especially this time of year, is very, very important. And it's something, of course, I think probably everybody listening can agree if you're going to be kind to people, you should do it all the time. But we're human beings, and so we have flaws. Yeah. But if you're going to go out of your way to do it, this is the time of year. So
yeah. Well, I guess partially in a sense too, but I was trying to wrap my mind around there, where it's like it almost just feels like this time of year is almost returning to its pagan roots in a way. It's like it became Christianity commodified this time of year to spread, to sort of make it become part of the Christian religion. But now it's like, now the whole thing is just much more just about the time of year. It's like, yes, of course it culminates on Christmas Day. That is still, that's still part of the tradition, but this is what it is. This Christmas isn't just Christmas Day. It's like Christmas it begins on Black Friday, or it's not just commercialization. I think people have adapted to that now, where that's how they feel. It's putting the lights up. It's doing all of the stuff that is Christmas. So
I think what you're trying to say, if I'm picking this up correctly, is that Christmas is increasingly becoming a sort of secular holiday and season.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
Right, where it's not so much about the specific Christian religious celebration as it is the practice of all of these traditions that you're right, like many of which come out of older pagan traditions, but of course were kept and folded in to the Christmas celebration. So yeah, I mean, honestly, even when it comes to like Christmas movies, when you think of your favorite Christmas movies, how many of them are about the birth of Christ, right? Like fucking none of them, right? Like that.
Well, that's that's kind of passing. Right. It's very. I've noticed that, where it's very like people sort of say, "Oh yeah," and I even did it. It's like, "Oh yeah," and Jesus, and also Jesus' birthday. It's like, yeah, all right, well, but yeah, secular is the word I was. Yeah, if I had that out in my head, I would have been able to articulate. But that's exactly what I was saying. It's become like sort of a secular, like long ass fucking, too long. Really, I think we can agree it is like too long. I try to stick to right after Thanksgiving. I don't get too into Christmas until after that. At least you have a
Thank
buffer.
You. Agreed. Well, The thing about it is, because you got to wait until at least after Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is its own fucking day, people. It
exactly.
Is its own
I'm
holiday.
a huge Thanksgiving fan, so I
totally yes.
Yeah.
And so like you got.
I actually.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead. No.
I was just going to say, like, the other thing too is if we want to preserve a sense of sanctity, right? Like if we want Christmas and Yule and this time of year to remain sacred, then it has to remain fucking special. Like, we can't dilute it by spreading it out over too much of the fucking year, or it loses all meaning. It just becomes this commercialized garbage period where, you're spending money and you don't even know why. If you like, you can't have steak every day, like, you got to save it and then you appreciate it. So like, if we just stick it to like at least after Thanksgiving, through like New Year's, and have that be the season and have that remain the season, then it's special, then it's sacred, then it means something, right?
Yeah, exactly. Emily, what is your most memorable favorite Christmas present?
Oh gosh.
I know that I threw that one out there. Tobias, if you have one off the top of your head, we'll jump to you. But that's a real stumper to throw out right here at the end.
Sure.
Of the conversation.
I think it actually was a Christmas present. I had this teddy bear when I was a little kid, and I got it from my grandparents on my mother's side. And every year, my mom had made this little elf costume for it. And so every single year I would dress up this teddy bear as a little elf for Christmas. And so that's one of my favorite Christmas memories. I still remember, I wish I still had this bear, but this bear was my companion through most of childhood. And I remember it had a little like scar on its muzzle from my grandpa had like the cherry of his cigarette had fallen on my bear, right?
Ah.
And I thought it just gave it character, like it's just that meant a lot to me. And dressing it up every year for Christmas kind of helped add to the magic of Christmas time for me when I was a kid.
Exactly.
Because then my bear was all Christmassy and he became an elf and we could celebrate Christmas together. So if I had to pick, that's got to be it. It's got to be it.
All right, Emily.
I think so. Like, I think this is something that a lot of kids don't do. I want to say it was around first or second, third grade, but for whatever reason, I decided, you know what? I'm not going to send Santa a Christmas list. I want surprises. And, back then I thought it was, the guy that came down the chimney, and my parents put a lot of effort into that. Like they like shoveled out little tiny pieces of coal and they made it a whole thing. Yeah. And, one year they got me an ant farm and a pet newt.
Wow.
And those were things that I never would have thought of, but they were so perfectly me. And I think that was, I've made lists ever since then. But I think when people really get you and get you stuff like that, it really, I think that's a really special gift.
Yeah, for sure.
Sure.
That's a fantastic
Well, what's
story.
your favorite Christmas gift?
Yeah, I'm curious.
Oh, well, I'll spoil. All right, for the people listening next plan on hearing next week's show, skip this part. Right? I have sort of a recency bias. I had a beloved pet rabbit, Sir Ralphus. He passed away a couple years ago, but I got him for Christmas about 12 or maybe 14 years ago now. So I just think that and she just became a super companion. So it was like the years of memories, all going back to him arriving on Christmas, kind of like, makes it a particularly special Christmas gift.
Priceless.
Really, in a lot of ways. So Now, Emily, I want to ask you about this because we talked about this at Strange Realities, and you said that at the end of the conversation, you said, well, it's really about raising awareness. So let's raise some awareness. Talk about the butterflies, how you raise butterflies, because I find this really fascinating. You probably remember I found it very fascinating at Strange Realities. I was kind of like bugging you, like, tell me how do you do this? How is this done? So talk a little bit about you raise butterflies, right?
Yes. And just to kind of tie into what we're talking about, there's a lot I raise specifically monarch butterflies, the very iconic orange and black butterflies. And they are heavily associated with the Day of the Dead in Mexico because the migration path, the migration happens right as that festival is going on, that they're returning to the overwintering sites. So it is believed that in that culture that the spirits of the loved ones are returning on the backs of these butterflies. Like they hitch a ride to visit for the Day of the Dead. And, coming right out of Halloween where we talk about, the veil is thin, the spirits are visiting, where Christmas, where the Victorian traditions, where you tell you tell ghost stories and you remember your loved ones that have passed. I always think they're a very special tie-in with that. But from a natural standpoint, I raise them because they are labeled as endangered by a classification agency. They are not protected by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Right.
But they're a very it's all pollinators that are endangered, not just monarchs, but monarchs are so iconic and relevant and nostalgic to people across so many cultures.
Right.
That raising them and sharing that online makes people realize how fragile our universe is. And if they slowly, they're kind of like a gateway. When people realize that they're threatened and this memory and this nostalgic thing that they value is so threatened, it eventually does lead people to actually care about, the world they live in. And we are, we're not invincible. Yeah. And so that's a big reason why I do it. It's not, I'm saving lives doing it, like from an egg to be a butterfly in the wild. That's only like 3 to 5%. In captivity, that goes up to about around 80%. It's not the number one way to save them. Like, I am not a person who wants to raise hundreds of them. That brings in all sorts of things. But the number one benefit to raising and sharing is spreading awareness. And that's why I do that. Everybody recognizes them. They're very important to people. So,
right, exactly.
That is why I
wanted to mention it. So how do you, and I'm pretty sure I asked you this at Strange Realities, but I forget the answer. So how do you get the eggs originally? Do you find them in the wild, or do you get them, you order them somehow? Like, how do you even start with the raising?
I collect from the wild, and I have a very strong position that you should only collect from the wild. Okay. If you're going to order online, you have to be very careful where you get them from, because they're a wild animal. They're not domesticated. Yes, there's butterfly farms, but I don't believe in messing with their genetics, their environment. I try to keep them as close to nature as possible. So I want to help along and shelter the ones that nature already delivered. So I go and look for little eggs or little caterpillars and bring them into netted enclosures and feed them until it's ready to let them go.
And you can identify the monarch egg when you're out and about, like in the forest? Because I feel like, is that a specific thing or do you just like get whatever butterfly eggs you find and then you're like, oh wow, it's whatever?
Yeah, they're pretty distinct. I've raised black swallowtails before. Like if I came across something cool, I might do it to watch it just for my own fascination. All of them need my help. But monarchs only eat one type of plant, and that's milkweed. So I know to look on that plant. It's very abundant in prairies. And a lot of times, I mean, they're about the size of a head of a pin. They're very tiny, but
oh wow,
I've been doing this since I was a kid. So I can pretty easily recognize them and what kind of shape I need to look for and that kind of thing.
Oh, wow. Interesting. This is such a fascinating. I really am fascinated by this. And when you mentioned the ant farm, as like a light bulb went off in my head, and I'm like, the ant farm, this is like leads right to the butterflies. I'm sensing a trend here. So, yeah, well, kudos to you. It's a really, like I said, I'm really fascinated by that. It's awesome. It's like gardening, but to another level almost.
Yeah, and like I do, I've been gardening for a few years. It's a hobby of mine, but like, honestly, it's because of them why I started. The number one way to protect them is to plant more habitat for them. That's the reason they are declining in numbers.
That makes sense, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there is like a whole problem with insects in general, like you said, pollinators.
Yeah.
The bees. There's something going on with the bees. That's another one of those things you hear about, but no one. People just kind of go, "Oh, it's the bees."
Because honeybees are naturalized and they are raised, and so a lot of people, and the ways the media talks about it, they'll usually, and you need a stock image, they're going to pull up a honeybee. It's recognizable, so people are like, "Well, I'm going to get a beehive." Well, that's the same as you're saying, I'm going to help the birds and then getting a batch of chickens. It's the native bees to this country that are struggling because also of lack of habitat. So if we plant more prairie, more wildflowers, more host plants, they will find it and they will be able to thrive again.
Yeah, well, let's hope so. But it seems like everything's going down the tubes these days, which is the perfect way to wrap up the Christmas special.
Merry Christmas.
Exactly.
Everything's terrible. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we could talk about that because it is really fascinating. Maybe sometime in the future we'll do a longer episode about these issues with the pollinators and what could happen if I've heard horror stories. Yeah, it's all a big ecosystem, and once one thing goes, but like I said, it's like then you hear this thing about the bees, and then it's like, oh, it also turns out all the corals dying because the water's too hot. And it's like,
it's
I'm getting
biodiversity.
Yeah. It's like I'm starting to think maybe the planet's dying, but I don't want to alarm anyone. Well, what's next for you guys? The Single Fortean Society's Yuletide Guide to High Strangeness. They can get it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and if that even still exists, but definitely on Amazon and at singularfortean.com, right? I got that right.
Yep.
So actually, it's not on Barnes & Noble. It's on Amazon. Okay. Yeah. And it's on singularfortean.com/books.
Ah, okay.
Yeah,
well, if they go there, they'll see it. They'll see it right on the thing anyway, right. I'm sure.
Yeah, I honestly don't know in terms of like bookstores where it'll be, but it'll be on our website or at something like Amazon.
Yeah. Bookstores are. Yeah, that's why I said it. Barnes & Noble's like barely hanging on as it is. I'm surprised. Yeah, it's. That's why I'm like, is that even still around, Barnes & Noble? Is that gone the way of Borders? So what's next for you guys now that this book has come out? Obviously, you want to relax for a while and soak in the Yule. But, what's on the drawing board for 2024 and possibly beyond?
I've got some stuff I can't talk about. So I'm going to be that fucking guy. Oh man, yeah. So many cool things coming up.
Because I find it often jinxes projects.
Well, like literally, like contractually, I can't talk about some stuff. But I've got, I filmed a really cool project for television this year that I can't say a ton about, but it's going to come out next year, and I think people will really enjoy that, and hopefully they'll learn something. I've got a couple book ideas that I'm kicking around. One of which I want to collaborate with one of my good buddies who, again, I really probably shouldn't say too much, but most people who are interested in the paranormal are going to know who he is. And otherwise, like we've got some appearances. I'll be at Dead of Winter in Alton in February. Let's see, I'll be we'll both be at Haunted America in Alton is that June?
Yes, end of June.
End of June. Mm-hmm. And then, I'll be at Spirits in the Spring in June up near us in Broadhead, Wisconsin. I'll be at the Rock Island, YMCA benefits, Paracon in October.
And folks can find all that information out at singularfortean.com, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and if you follow us on social media, that's probably the best way to keep up with things as they come out. So you can mm-hmm. find the Singular Fortean Society on everything from Facebook to TikTok to X to Instagram to Threads. I mean, we're on all of it.
And we do have a Discord. You can find that in the link tree on our bio, in our socials, or on our website.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That Discord server is pretty active, honestly, mm-hmm. and it's got a lot of people in it who are very interested in the paranormal and these types of subjects. So if you want a very open-minded, welcoming, inclusive Discord community to just talk about weird shit, look no further. The Singular Fortean Society's Discord server is fucking perfect for that.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and giving me so much time and having a really fun conversation tonight. This was great. Perfect.
This was fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We would do it again anytime.
Well, I just may have to take you up on that offer. But I want to thank you again. Wish you a very Merry Christmas, Happy Holiday season. I hope Santa's good to you. And since I probably won't talk to you through the New Year, so have a Happy New Year as well.
You as well.
Thank you. Yeah. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year to you and yours.
All that good stuff.